electronic on your phone, I would ask that you go ahead and turn to Exodus chapter 1. Now, Exodus is the second book of the Bible. We're going to take a few weeks. I'm not exactly sure how many weeks we're going to be in the book of Exodus, but we'll be in it for a while. We're going to look at the story. It's one of those books of the Bible that, in order to understand the whole Bible, we have to understand this story. It's referred to so many different times, the story of the Israelites being rescued or freed from captivity or slavery in Egypt and brought to the Promised Land. Now, in Exodus, we don't get all the way to the Promised Land. The remaining books in the beginning, the Bible is kind of divided into different parts. The first 5 books of the Bible are categorized together. There's a fancy word called the Pentateuch. You don't need to know that. Anyway, in my head, that's always kind of how I'm thinking. So I will refer to them. You might hear me refer to them as the Pentateuch. Don't worry about it. It just kind of comes out. But those 5 books of the Bible will talk a lot about God introducing himself in Genesis. We have Adam and Eve, we have Noah, we have Abraham, God's promise to Abraham and his family. And that goes through. Abraham has a son, Isaac. Isaac has 2 wives, and from Isaac, the 12 tribes of Israel form, and we get to Joseph. Joseph has these amazing interactions with his brothers. Some are good and some are pretty rough, and his brothers don't like everything. Joseph has dreams and visions from God, and he tells his brothers about them, and sometimes older brothers don't respond to that well. They sell him into slavery in Egypt. Joseph's life is an incredible story of ups and downs. But ultimately, God put him in place in Egypt. He interprets Pharaoh's dreams, prepares Egypt for a time of famine. Eventually, all of his brothers show up because Egypt is prepared for famine. And there we are. Like, through this whole process, God rescues them, rescues their family, and we end up in Exodus. Joseph has died. All of the generations of people that were there have died. And they find themselves in this spot. I'm going to start in verse 6. So it starts off with talking about who has been there. It names the brothers and the family. And now verse 6, now Joseph and all of his brothers and all that generation died. But the Israelites were exceedingly fruitful. And they multiplied greatly, increased in numbers, and became so numerous that the land was filled with them. Now, specifically in the first couple chapters that we're going to look at today, there are moments where maybe we will hear some of the story of Genesis. So in Genesis, when God creates the world and he creates Adam and Eve, and his instructions to them are, be fruitful and multiply, and you are in charge of the earth, and you are to subdue it. Through that story, we can see where they understood, they believed that some of God's interactions with them, some of his blessings to them would be children. So as we read this, we are supposed to be reading, understanding that they are blessed by God. Now, generations have passed, but they are increasing in number. Verse 8, then a new king to whom Joseph meant nothing came to power in Egypt. Joseph had rescued the people of Egypt. Through God, through Joseph's interpretation of the dream, he had saved them from starvation. But generations have passed. A new king who, the story of Joseph means nothing to him. Look, he said to his people, the Israelites have become far too numerous for us. Come, we must deal shrewdly with them or they will become even more numerous, and if war breaks out, will join our enemies, fight against us, and leave the country. We have this new one interesting element. You would think, and honestly, historians kind of wish that the author of Exodus would have said which Pharaoh we're talking about. Because there's some debate over when this exactly took place. But if they had named the Pharaoh, we would know exactly. But I think it's intentional. You would imagine that the most powerful person in that area of the world, at least, would have been named for sure. But they don't. You'll notice who is named, but we'll get there. But this king, this Pharaoh, is looking out and he is going, there are so many Israelites. If somebody comes and attacks us, they will join them and we will be overthrown. So it says that we must deal shrewdly with them. It's as if he's trying to be wise, as kings would attempt to be. We should deal shrewdly with them. We should prepare for this moment, and he comes up with some solutions. Verse 11, so they put slave masters over them to oppress them with forced labor. They built Pithom and Ramses as store cities for Pharaoh. But the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied and spread. So the Egyptians came to dread the Israelites and worked them ruthlessly. They made their lives bitter and with harsh labor in brick and mortar and with all kinds of work in the fields. In all their harsh labor, the Egyptians worked them ruthlessly. These sentences feel a little bit weird. They feel a little bit funny to read. But the point is, and the author is getting it to us over and over and over, his solution, his first solution was, I am going to work them. I am going to work them harshly. I am going to work them ruthlessly. But in it, we can see that God says, but I am still with them. That phrase, and they increased in number, we should be understanding that God is still with them in spite of it. So first solution didn't work. Verse 15, then the king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives, whose names were Shiphrah and Puah. Okay, we don't have Pharaoh's name, but we have the midwives. When you are helping the Hebrew women during childbirth on the delivery stool, if you see that the baby is a boy, kill him. But if it is a girl, let her live. The midwives, however, feared God, and they did not do what the king of Egypt had told them to do. They let the boys live. Then the king of Egypt summoned the midwives and asked them, why have you done this? Why have you let the boys live? The midwives answered Pharaoh, Hebrew women are not like Egyptian women. They are vigorous and give birth before the midwives arrive. So God was kind to the midwives, and the people increased and became even more numerous. And because the midwives feared God, he gave them families of their own. Pharaoh, first solution, I will work them like crazy. That didn't work. Second solution, I will take these two women, these two midwives who will help the Hebrew women give birth. And in this fascinating act of protest, in a way, they were like, no, we are not doing that. They said no to the most powerful person in their world. Now, they gave him a story about, well, they give birth so fast. I have no idea if that was true. But we definitely are told in this story that they were not going to do this. That they stand up and they say, this is an action that we will not take. Now, in this moment, we're not really hearing in this story that Israel necessarily even completely understands or remembers who God is. We have these two midwives, and it says that they feared God, so they would not do this. Then Pharaoh, verse 22, gave this order to all his people: every Hebrew boy that is born you must throw into the Nile, but let every girl live. I will work them. And it didn't work. I will have these two women, these two midwives, and they will kill all of the baby boys. And it didn't work. Not only did it not work, God continued to bless them, and he specifically blessed these two midwives. So Pharaoh's response now is, fine. I'm making a public decree. Every Hebrew boy must be killed. There's as I've been studying and preparing for this, one of the thoughts that kind of come out is, why is he really doing this? He says that if we were invaded, the Hebrew men could jump in and join our the opposing force. So that would be the understanding of getting rid of the Hebrew men, Hebrew boys. But it's also as if he's trying to bring, by allowing the girls, the baby girls, to live, it's like he's trying to bring them into his own people. Because at some point, as they get older, they would have children. Right? And if all of the boys, if all of the Hebrew men are gone, they would get pulled into Egypt. There is believed to be somewhere around 400 years between the time of Joseph and the moment we're at. Generations have come and generations have gone. And it's always been so interesting to me how we got from Joseph to slavery in Egypt. How we got from Joseph as being one of the most powerful people in Egypt, rescuing his family, to all of a sudden we turn to Exodus and they are now slaves. Chapter 2, we are introduced to Moses. Now a man of the tribe of Levi married a Levite woman, and she became pregnant and gave birth to a son. To my knowledge and understanding, this is the only reference to Moses' biological father, is right here. A Levite married a Levite woman. They had a child. That's it. When she saw that he was a fine child, she hid him for 3 months. Remember where we are in the story, the Pharaoh had said, well, I will work them, it didn't work. I will have the midwives kill them, that didn't work. I will give a public decree that all Hebrew boys will be killed. thrown into the Nile. But his mom couldn't do it. She looked on him. It says, fine child. One of the clues back to Genesis would be when God created the earth, when God created, he kept using the word good. The word good in Hebrew is tov. The same word is used here. She saw him, and she saw that he was good. What a beautiful moment. What an understanding of God's desire for each person displayed right here. She looked at him and she said, he is good. I cannot do this. So she hid him for 3 months until she couldn't hide him any longer. But when she could hide him no longer, she got a papyrus basket for him and coated it with tar and pitch. Then she placed the child in it and put it among the reeds along the bank of the Nile. His sister stood at a distance to see what would happen to him. Then Pharaoh's daughter went down to the Nile to bathe. Her attendants were walking along the riverbank. So in this moment, you have this mom who is saying, my son is good. I can't do this. But she can't hide him anymore. So she puts him in a basket. I think that we actually can even hear the word for basket is actually the same one as ark, which she also covers it in some of the same stuff that Noah covered the ark in. She puts him in the river and she is like, God, I trust you. I can't do this, but here he is. The sister walks. If this is the same sister that's referenced later, they think that she is about 6 years old in this moment. Now, I've met some really, really smart 6-year-old girls. And some very responsible 6-year-old girls. And this girl definitely comes across as remarkable. So Pharaoh's daughter goes down to the Nile to bathe. It's really interesting. There's been lots of questions about why she was there because the Egyptians had indoor plumbing. Crazy, right? But for whatever reason, she went to the Nile to bathe. We can feel God orchestrating this story. He is not mentioned very much so far, but we can feel him throughout all of it. She saw the basket among the reeds and sent her female slave to get it. She opened it, saw the baby. He was crying. She felt sorry for him. This is one of the Hebrew babies, she said. Because who else is going to put their baby in a basket? Verse 7, then she asked Pharaoh's daughter, shall I go and get one of the Hebrew women to nurse the baby for you? This is Moses' sister, 6-year-old, watching from a distance. She notices Pharaoh's daughter, picks up the baby. Maybe she can see the compassion on her face, and she jumps up and says, I have an idea. I have a solution to your problem. Shall I go and get one of the Hebrew women to nurse the baby for you? Yes, go, she answered. So the girl went and got the baby's mom. In a few chapters, we are going to hear the questions over and over and over. Moses looking at Pharaoh and saying things like, let my people go. Those responses are no after no. But here we have Pharaoh's daughter in the river, picking up the baby, and Moses' sister says, "Shall I go?" "Yes, go." Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Take this baby and nurse him for me, and I will pay you." So the woman took the baby and nursed him. When the child grew older, she took him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. She named him Moses, saying, "I drew him out of the water." Name Moses in Hebrew means "I drew him out of the water." In Egyptian, it has a different meaning. It means son of, we don't know. Like, there would be another word after. It's got this feel to it this whole time, right? Moses, when Pharaoh's daughter would be, "Oh, my son Moses, I took him out of the water," remembering how he got there. And at the same time, people would hear that and be like, "Moses." Moses as a person in this moment has to feel like he doesn't really have a home. We're going to, as we continue into chapter 2, that starts to come out so strong. But he has to be going, am I an Egyptian or am I an Israelite? Am I a Hebrew or am I royalty? Who am I? What am I supposed to do? Who am I supposed to be? Verse 11, and we jump years ahead. Years ahead. After Moses had grown up, he went out to where his own people were and watched them at their hard labor. He saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his own people. Looking this way and that, seeing no one, he killed the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. The next day he went out and he saw two Hebrews fighting. He asked the one in the wrong, "Why are you hitting your fellow Hebrew?" The man said, "Who made you ruler and judge over us? Are you thinking of killing me as you killed the Egyptian?" Then Moses was afraid and thought, "What I did must have become known." When Pharaoh heard this, he tried to kill Moses, but Moses fled from Pharaoh and went to live in Midian, where he sat down by a well. Moses, having grown up in the palace. Now we don't know what that life was like. We don't know how close this daughter was to her father. We don't know how close Moses was to Pharaoh. We get kind of the feeling that they weren't that close based on Pharaoh's reaction here. But Moses walks outside and he is in this battle for who am I and what am I supposed to do? It's as if he knows within him that God has called him to something. That God has called him to be a protector, to stand up for justice. That God has put those things inside of him, but he doesn't know how to live it out. It says that he looks and he sees an Egyptian mistreating, beating an Israelite. And he looks around and he decides that no one is looking, so he kills him and he hides the body. In this moment, he is identifying with the Israelites. I am one of them. I am with them. But it's not as if that identifying is necessarily rewarded. One, he is afraid. Obviously, he's afraid because he has killed an Egyptian, so he hides the body. Then he goes out and he sees two Hebrews fighting, and he's like, why are you guys doing this to each other? And their response to him is, well, who do you think you are? Are you going to kill us just like you killed the Egyptian? You, at least as I read it, it would feel like Moses is being like, I am with you guys. Like, let's figure this out. And they're like, no, you're not. You think you're one of us, but you grew up in the palace or close to the palace. You might be an Israelite, but you're really not. I get back to Moses. He is a character in this moment who is struggling, who has lost his way, who doesn't know where he is and doesn't know where he should be, knows that if he stays in Egypt, he is in trouble, but doesn't have anywhere to go. The story of Exodus is the story of God rescuing his people from captivity in Egypt and leading them to the promised land. But the story can't start until God rescues Moses. Verse 15, when Pharaoh heard this, he tried to kill Moses, but Moses fled from Pharaoh and went to live in Midian, where he sat down by a well. In the Bible, if you want to meet a spouse, you go to a well. People get married, people find their spouses at wells all the time in the Bible. One of the resources I'm using in going through this, she's an author, she's a scholar named Carmen Inez, and she actually has this online like college level class that if you're interested in, I can get you. It's free. You can watch along as we go through it. But she was talking about, she's a professor at a Bible college, and she was like, we should just put a well in the middle of the campus. Like, students are looking to get married, just go hang out by the well. Like, it's the biblical thing to do. Now, I mean, make jokes about it, but desert climate, right? You're going to find a well. Sat down by a well. Verse 16, now a priest from Midian had 7 daughters, and they came to draw water and fill the troughs to water their father's flock. Some shepherds came along and drove them away, but Moses got up and came to their rescue and watered their flock. You see, it is still in him. He is there. He is by himself. He is sitting down at a well, and these daughters show up, and people start to mistreat them, and it is in him to stand up for them. When the girls returned to Reuel, their father, he asked them, "Why have you returned so early today?" They answered, "An Egyptian," which is interesting. Right? We have Moses bouncing back and forth. Here, he's identified, at least they perceive him as an Egyptian. An Egyptian rescued us from the shepherds. He even drew water for us and watered the flock. "Where is he?" Reuel asked his daughters. Why did you leave him? Invite him to have something to eat." Moses agreed to stay with the man who gave his daughter Zipporah to Moses in marriage. See, he went to a well, he got married. Zipporah gave birth to a son, and Moses named him Gershom, saying, "I have become a foreigner in a foreign land." We think of Moses as this incredible leader. And he was. And Moses had flaws. I actually think that Moses struggled with anger. As you look at his life story, there are moments where it's like he gets angry and he'll lash out. It's one of those things that kept him from being able to go to the promised land. And you can see that in these moments, but mixed with it is this man who had a sense of justice put in him. It is part of who he is. Part of what and who we are called to be is to understand how God created us, and then how do we live that out honoring him. God puts a sense of justice in you. How do you live that out and honor him at the same time? God puts a heart of compassion in you. How do you live that out and honor him at the same time? We have Moses, who is not really an Egyptian. He's an Israelite, but he doesn't feel accepted by them. He's not accepted by Egypt. He's not accepted by the Israelites. And now he's in the desert. And he names his son, I have become a foreigner in a foreign land. Verse 23, during that long period, the king of Egypt died. The Israelites groaned in their slavery and cried out, and their cry for help because of their slavery went up to God. God heard their groaning and remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. So God looked on the Israelites and was concerned about them. One reason that I think they don't name who Pharaoh or the king, however we're going to refer to him, one reason why I don't think they name him, one is to kind of belittle him. He is not the hero in this story. He thinks he's all-powerful, which we will continue to see through the story. But he isn't. So he's not named. Another aspect of it would be the Pharaoh's change. Right? We just heard one. Right? Well, actually, in those two chapters, we've heard two. The king died. A new king arose whose Joseph's story didn't mean anything to him. Right? Moses, through all of this, he is now in the desert. And the narrator says the king died. One thing that you'll notice, though, the battle with Pharaoh, they all are, I don't know if I can say they're all the same, but our perspective on them is they are all against God, and they are all against his people. As we read it, we are to understand that Pharaoh is not for Israel. The king of Egypt is not for Israel. And God will set them free. So I think it's kind of a double meaning to not name him. I think there's a little bit that's like the heroes of this story. In the first two chapters, we have the midwives, Shiphrah and Puah. Two unlikely heroes who decide that I'm going to follow what God has put in them. We have Moses' mother who gives birth to a son and looks at him and says, "He is good. I will not follow Pharaoh's decree." Pharaoh's own daughter. Pharaoh has this decree. All of the Israelite boys must be thrown into the Nile, and she is bathing in the Nile, and the baby floats up. She sees him in the reeds, and in this moment, Pharaoh, who's supposed to be the most powerful man in that, at least that area of the world, his own daughter is like, "I'm going to keep that baby." God's hand is through this story. All of these turns. You have a young girl who's like, "I've got a solution to your problem." And she brings him back to his mom. But in all of it, we have this young boy who becomes a young man who seems to not know where he belongs. And when we don't know where we belong, when we don't know how to honor God with the things that He's put inside of us, we don't know what we're doing. And we make mistakes. And we make mistakes even when we know. But we run. And we do things in our own power. And we mess things up. Next week, we're going to look at chapter 3. And chapter 3 has this incredible story that we know of the bush burning and God talking to Moses through the bush. Moses is in the wilderness and the bush is burning. It's not burning up. So Moses goes over to check it out, and he and God have this interaction. I'm skipping ahead to verse 6, and we're going to go back over it next week. But I couldn't leave us with Moses struggling in the wilderness. Right, so this is verse 6. He's come closer. God has told him to take his shoes off, his sandals off, because this is holy ground. Then God says this to Moses: "I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob." We've heard that before. Sometimes we can hear those things and they can become so normal to us. Yeah, you're the God of history. Abraham, Isaac, Joseph, Jacob. I get it. But put yourself in Moses' spot. Am I an Egyptian? Am I an Israelite? I am floundering in the wilderness and I don't know where I am. I am a foreigner in a foreign land. And God meets him and says, "I am the God of your father, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob." God is saying, "You are mine. You might not know where you belong. I am telling you, you belong here." I am telling you, you are mine. Your history is with me. Your family is with me. Your people is with me. The end of chapter 2, it said that the cries came up. God heard their cries. It doesn't say that they were crying out to God. It says they were crying out, and God heard their cries. He remembers his covenant. It's not a sense that God has forgotten. We shouldn't read that and be like, well, God forgot his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. No, the message we should be hearing is that God remembered his covenant, and the time to act is now. The time to act is now. I'm going to ask the worship team if you'll come up. So many pieces and aspects to this story clue us into what's coming. From Pharaoh's daughter being asked the question by Moses, his sister, should I go and take him? Shall I go and get a Hebrew woman to feed this Hebrew baby? And her response being, go. To Moses' mother looking at her child and saying, he is good. To God hearing the cries of the people of Israel in slavery. I'm going to read a few verses from Psalm 55. As for me, I call to God, and the Lord saves me. Evening, morning, and noon, I cry out in distress, and he hears my voice. He rescues me unharmed from the battle waged against me, even though many oppose me. God, who is enthroned from of old, who does not change, he will hear them and humble them, because they have no fear of God. Moses, in this moment, he hears, you are mine. I'm the God of your father, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I am the same yesterday, today, and forever. I do not change. He hears the cries, and he responds. I'm going to ask that you stand. This week, as I was preparing it just kept coming back to those of us who need to know where we are, need to know who we are and where we're placed. Maybe God has put something inside of you, part of your personality, part of who you are, and you're wondering, how does it work with me? Ask God to speak to you. Ask him to work inside of your heart. But for us to just identify that we are God's. We are his children. He's the same yesterday, today, and forever. We're going to sing a story we're going to sing a song that tells the story of Egypt. We've sang it before.